Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Mark of Balance podcast. I'm Mark. Hope you guys are doing all right. And today I want to get into a series called the Light and Dark series, where I look at certain Star Wars content and I discuss the light side and the dark side of it. The light side being the parts where I think it fits in thematically with what George Lucas laid the groundwork for, and the dark side where I think it deviates and actually takes away from the Star Wars galaxy as a whole. Today we'll be looking at the infamous Rise of Skywalker, the end of the saga, and what a tumultuous end it was. Today I'm mostly going to look at the dark side because I feel like there is such a large amount of things to touch on where I think it really does hurt the Star Wars universe as a whole. But I also want to stress that if you did enjoy the movie and you did have a good time watching it, I do not want to take away that joy that you felt watching it. It is a fun movie. It has the action. It has some great moments, definitely. And it even has some good Star Wars moments itself where it does hit on good themes that have been discussed in other Star Wars movies, and it does do them in a different yet fresh way. And I'm going to touch on those in the next episode, the light side episode. But today we are getting into the nitty-gritty for sure. I'd like to stress that I'm only going to be looking at the thematic problems that I have with the movie. The narrative problems are blatant and obvious. Me touching on them would just be redundant at this point. It's been a year since it came out, and with all the news that Palpatine was not supposed to be in this movie from the beginning and was thrown in a couple months before it was released, and the obvious plot holes and terrible choices like the Sith dagger that where you stand on an exact location in the middle of a planet next to a sea on a cliff, and you look at the debris of the Death Star, and with all the tides this debris somehow hasn't moved and it's still in the same spot, and if you pull a tab on the side of the dagger, it will tell you the exact location of the throne room where the Sith Wayfinder is, and to get there you have to take a boat and you have to climb through debris, and when you get there you'll find the Sith Wayfinder. And I'm just gonna stop. I'm just gonna stop because it's a lot, and I know if I just keep going, I'm only gonna work myself up. But that's why I'm not gonna talk about it, and we're gonna stick to the themes and where I think it really matters. Where George Lucas lacked in his dialogue writing in the prequels, and sometimes in the original trilogy where they needed to get writers to help him out, I think he more than makes up for in his themes and his choices. George Lucas wanted Star Wars to be a modern day myth. And myths are supposed to be told to children to teach valuable lessons. And I think George Lucas embedded so many great values throughout all of the films that he was directly involved with, not the sequel trilogy, the originals and the prequels. And I think those values should be upheld throughout the entire saga. And I do think that the Rise of Skywalker severely impacted these values and take away a lot from what Star Wars is trying to teach kids. And I think it does send the wrong message because, like George Lucas always says, Star Wars is supposed to be for kids. It's always supposed to be for their enjoyment and for their viewing, and with them in mind. So when those values are kind of infringed upon or tweaked or changed because of narrative choices, that's where I think the most damage is done to the Star Wars legacy and the saga. The first reason is when you boil down The Rise of Skywalker, it is a movie about revenge. Rey's whole journey in the movie, after finding out that her parents were killed by Palpatine, was revenge. That was the only thing driving her, and you could tell. She was very angry throughout the rest of the movie. Her duel with Kylo, you can see the hate in her eyes. And in the end, she gets her revenge. She kills Palpatine, and she learns nothing from it, really. She doesn't learn that revenge isn't the way. Shout out, Mando. And she doesn't become a stronger character because of it. She does it because she got help from older past Jedi, really. It's really disappointing that 35 years later, this movie is called Star Wars storytelling to regress, actually. I mean, the whole point of Return of the Jedi, and the reason the name didn't stay Revenge of the Jedi, is because revenge just isn't a thing to teach children about. And the whole ending of Return of the Jedi was to stress, forgiveness and love and not revenge. Now, I'm not trying to say that Palpatine was able to be saved or was going to be redeemed in something. No, definitely not. They really wrote themselves into a corner because they didn't make Ben Solo the main villain in The Rise of Skywalker. Because of the backlash from Last Jedi, they needed to do something safe. They didn't want to take any more risks because of the backlash that they got from Last Jedi. And because of that, it led them to bring Palpatine back, because it was a safe choice. And that's a reoccurring thing with Disney Star Wars, with the movies. They didn't want to take any risks, and they were too afraid to subvert any expectations, because when they did, they got backlash. And I will discuss later The Last Jedi in another episode of the Light and Dark series. But I think Last Jedi really was putting Star Wars on a new path, and a really interesting one. I mean, just imagine a really deep thematic ending where Rey reaches out to Kylo, and she really taps into that relationship that's been boiling up the whole trilogy, and Kylo is reminded of his parents, Han and Leia's passing really having an impact on him, and even after all the terrible things he's done, just like Vader, we could see him redeemed, and we could see Rey being a very wise and powerful Jedi, learning from Luke's story, but even taking it to the next level, getting a really satisfying ending for all 9 of these movies put together, making this one complete saga of, fall and rise, literally Rise of Skywalker. It's just a bummer to look back on it and to see that they were too afraid to take that risk and follow that creative vision that The Last Jedi set out, and instead reverted back and I think doing a lot more damage than they did good, and basically telling a revenge tale. I mean, I understand following up Return of the Jedi to end a saga is no easy task. It's my favorite movie just because of the ending. But with all the creative minds that have entered Lucasfilm and the 35 years of experience and what is a Star Wars story, you would think they would be able to get it right, or at least closer to something that would match what George would do thematically in a movie. And the second reason, which I think is also really important to what George tried to teach kids about, death is a natural part of life. The Rise of Skywalker has more fake-out deaths than I've ever seen in a movie. I mean, there's 5 I can think of off the top of my head. Chewie dies and is actually alive. C-3PO dies, he gets his memory wiped, but it comes back. Kylo gets stabbed in the chest and then Rey saves him and should be dead. Rey then dies and comes back to life. Kylo is dead. Well, you think he's dead, and then he comes back, and then he dies to save Rey, and she comes back to life. I mean, it is wild how many times they fake out death in this movie. And obviously, narratively, it is not a good choice. It's very jarring. But the main thing is the theme of it. Death is supposed to be permanent, and death is supposed to be a celebration of life in the eyes of Star Wars. When someone dies, they become a part of the Force. You don't miss them, but you cherish them, and you celebrate their life. Even though the Jedi were hypocrites during the prequel era, and that was obviously exposed, some of their values were very important and should be taught. Death is inevitable, but trying to stop it and control life, or trying to reverse it, puts you on a dark, dark path. I mean, Anakin's whole arc in the prequel trilogy is teaching you that you can't control death. You can only learn from it, and you must move on, but you can always celebrate them. That's the message George has always been trying to send. I mean, even in the original trilogies, when Vader is killed, I mean, it's sad, but it's also a celebration that he was redeemed in his last moments. He's finally moved on and become one with the Force. The Force ghosts aren't meant to say life after death, but they're supposed to be guardian angels, someone that's always there to give you guidance from what you've learned from them when they were alive. Death creates the motion of fear, and in Yoda's words, fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. Anakin is the epitome of this quote. He fears Padme's death. Because he fears it, he's angry that he can't stop it. And when he tries to stop it, his anger leads to the actual cause of her death in the end. And this hate ultimately leads to his suffering, which makes him become Darth Vader and become this slave to Palpatine throughout the original trilogy until Luke is able to tap in and redeem him. And this was all told in the 1970s and 80s. And now, in 2019, and this movie, we've taken a step back. And now, kids that might have grown up on the sequel trilogy, I know this may sound dramatic, but they don't get that same lesson that kids probably got from the original and especially the prequels. I know this got all very dark and deep, but that's why I love Star Wars, because I think its lessons are timeless. And they should always be repeated and taught throughout. And when there's a movie in there that doesn't uphold those lessons, I think it really tarnishes the franchise as a whole, and especially the generation that grows up on it. Now to move into something fun that also kind of works with my second point about death. I have a theory about the Force healing that was introduced in The Rise of Skywalker. If you remember, The Mandalorian Season 1 was already a couple episodes in by this time where Rise of Skywalker was coming out. The week The Rise of Skywalker came out, they moved up the episode of Mandalorian that was supposed to come out on Friday to Wednesday. In that episode, ironically, Grogu shows his Force healing ability. This was never shown in Star Wars canon. Obviously, in video games, there's Force healing, but video games should not be taken face value when it comes to Force abilities. And I'm all for new abilities. And I think the Force being able to heal someone does make sense. But I think it's very weird that they moved up the episode of Mandalorian early to show the Force ability before it happened in the movie. I think they did it because, once again, they were too scared to take a risk. If they had just shown Force healing without anything or any backstory to it, they probably would have gotten a lot of backlash. More backlash than what they got for Rise of Skywalker. So they decided they needed to show Force healing canon-wise before the movie came out. And that's why they moved the episode up. I know they probably didn't want it to come out on a Friday because the movie was coming out, so they wanted people to go to the movie theater. But in my head, and I think I have enough evidence here, it would make sense that they were too scared to take that risk and put in a new ability without having a backup to be like, hey, wait, Grogu did it. See, we already did it before. It's okay that we did it in the movie. I don't know. That's my 2 cents. I think there's some merit to it, and I hope one day someone admits to it so I can feel good about myself. And there's one other thing I want to talk about. It's not pertaining to the first reason or the second reason. It's just something that was very, very weird when I heard it after the movie came out, and it made me really, really upset that it's how it went down. In the end, spoiler alert, sorry, Rey taps into the Force, and she gets help from all the past Jedi. She hears all these voices. Really cool concept. I really like that they brought in all these different voice actors. Obviously, Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor came back for Obi-Wan and Anakin, and even Samuel L. Jackson for Mace Windu. And I was so excited because I heard Ahsoka Tano and Ashley Eckstein. I thought it was awesome that they did this really deep cut, something I wasn't expecting, and something I grew up on. Like I said, I'm a huge Clone Wars guy because I grew up on it. I watched it week to week as a kid. So when I heard that Ahsoka Tano was in the last movie, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Later, I find out there was another voice added of another Jedi that we saw, Adi Gallia. Does that name ring a bell to you? Maybe to some hardos out there it does. But I had to look it up. And she was in, I believe, maybe 4 episodes of the Clone Wars. Other than that, she was a background Jedi in the prequels. Why did they add someone like this compared to someone like Ahsoka Tano? I mean, they even added Kanan Jarrus from Rebels with Freddie Prinze Jr., which I thought was another worthy person to be a part of the Force. He was awesome. He's one of my favorite characters in Star Wars. But Adi Gallia? If you don't recall, she dies in Clone Wars when Savage Opress stabs her with the crown of his head because he has horns on his head. I just didn't understand why this Jedi was chosen to be a part of this when they really had no significant value in the Clone Wars universe. And in the end, I really do think it takes away from all the other deep cuts that actually meant something. Like hearing Ahsoka Tano and hearing Kanan, like someone that we've spent a lot of time with, and they had years of people and fans caring about them. And then in the end, they're kind of just thrown in there with Adi Gallia? I don't know. I thought it was really weird. I actually just looked it up now. They also included Aayla Secura and Luminara Unduli, which are cool. I'm okay with them because they were much more prominent in the Clone Wars series, and Aayla Secura will always be, kind of a cool Jedi to see because of Order 66 and the terrible scene where Bly shoots her down with all of his men on Felucia. But I don't know, that one Jedi being added among all these other really important people, I think it just, waters down the whole thing in the end. And I just think it's another thing where they thought they were doing something cool. I'm sure this was probably J.J. Abrams' idea. I thought they were doing something really cool, like, oh, look at this deep cut we did. We got this Jedi that probably only, super hardos know. I don't know. I didn't like it. And I think, once again, it takes away something. I also think all of them should have showed up as Force Ghost. Not all of them, just the main ones that we really care about. That would have been really cool. But they decided to go with the voices, which is fine. I get it. But I don't know. That's my 2 cents on that last part. And I think that's all I really wanted to talk about thematically, and then my kind of end theory things. Like I said, I enjoyed watching The Rise of Skywalker. It's a fun movie. It has good moments that I'll talk about in the next episode, the light side episode. But overall, I think it just suffers from things that really make it feel like less of a Star Wars movie in the grand scheme of things. And I hope you got something out of this, or if you were thinking, why didn't I like it as much as I thought I would? I hope that my reasons might have been kind of eye-opening for you and be like, oh, yeah, that does kind of make it seem a little more terrible. Kidding. But yeah, those are my thoughts. I'm eventually going to do a ranking of all the movies, and then you'll see exactly where Rise of Skywalker ends on that list, and it's mostly because of the points I raised today. And you could probably guess where it is. But like I said, if you enjoyed the movie, I don't want to take that away. It is a fun movie. I think it has some really good moments. But those are the two reasons I think that have really irked me for a while, and kind of I see some things on the internet, obviously, with fan culture and toxicity in Star Wars. I've seen a lot of things trying to defend the movie, and that's fine. If people like Rey, that's fine. And I think Rey is a good character. But I think the choices that they made with her in here make it very hard to like her as a character. Especially, I did like her in Force Awakens and then Last Jedi. I think she was growing into something that could have been really special. But I think these two reasons that I laid out today really hurt her in the end. And people that defend her, that's fine. But I think, there are some flaws, and it's not Daisy Ridley's fault, and it's not her fault. It's just uninspired people and Disney execs being way too afraid to make another risk-filled movie. And I think overall it was a terrible decision to not take a risk. Yeah, I think that's it. My final thought, no, I did not like when she said she was a Skywalker. I think a lot of people didn't think that landed, but that's fine. Wasn't for me. But I think that's the end. I really want to thank you for listening. I hope you learned something. If you do want to discuss anything or bring up any other points that you thought I might have missed, definitely interact with me on Instagram at @star_wars_mark of balance, or on Twitter at mark of balance. I definitely want to hear from you guys. I definitely want it to be a discussion. If you think I was wrong about anything, I definitely want to discuss it. I love talking about Star Wars, obviously. So hearing from you guys would be awesome. And I think that's it. The next episode, we'll talk about the light side and some of the themes that I think Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker actually did well in upkeeping in the end. So yeah, until next time, I'll talk to you guys later, and may the Force be with you.